Hello, and a very warm welcome to today's Cell and Gene Therapy Insights panel discussion, titled When Does Outsourcing Autologous Collection Center Qualification and the Cell Therapy Supply Chain Make Sense? I'm Charlotte Barker, an editor at BioInsights, and joining me today are a panel of experts. Amongst other things, we're going to discuss the evolution of CAR T therapy logistics, compare in-house and outsourced models for managing supply chains, and explore how the industry can improve efficiency and quality control. As always, do feel free to pose your questions to our panel using the Ask a Question box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the session. If you'd like to direct a question to a specific panelist, do try to indicate that in your message. That's really helpful for me. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our presenters now. Jenny Newman, Senior Director of Operations at NMDP Biotherapies, oversees supply chain and donor management for cell and gene therapy. Marcel van Houten is Director of Global Supply Chain and Distribution for Cell and Gene Therapy at Orchard Therapeutics, specializing in ultra-rare diseases with over 25 years of experience in supply chain leadership. Amy Hines is VP of apheresis strategy at Cryoport Systems. With over 25 years in cellular therapy field, she has a background in oncology, transplant nursing, and network management. So there's a great experience on the panel today. Really looking forward to getting into the discussion. But first, we're just going to start off with a brief introduction from each speaker, just to set the scene. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jenny.
Hi, thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I'm here from NMDP, or NMDP Biotherapies. And for those that don't know about NMDP Biotherapies, we have about 35 years of experience in the cell therapy landscape. We've managed, as you can see, over 100,000 cell transplants. Annually, we see about 7,500. We continue to see that number grow as time goes on. And we have the world's most diverse registry of 41 million. As we think forward in terms of the services that we currently have offered, we have numerous services that we're able to provide, from anywhere from allogeneic cell sourcing, cord blood unit cell sourcing, bioinformatics consulting, and CRO services. But today we're really focused on those autologous collection, network qualification, onboarding, and management, as well as the supply chain management for those autologous products. We work with apheresis centers around the world with that onboarding, training, and managing. And we really take a human-based delivery model that allows us to coordinate those multiple stakeholders that are needed in order to ensure that the cell therapy is able to get to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. So we work between all those different parties on a day-to-day basis, both with the qualification and onboarding of those apheresis centers, working with the patient scheduling or enrolling on those particular clinical studies, scheduling, as well as clinical site management, standards documentation, and troubleshooting, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We see that we're currently able to successfully meet about 99% of shipments meeting those manufacturing slots, and 100% of those shipments are delivered within about 48 hours. And with that introduction, I will hand it over to Marcel.
All right, great. Thanks very much for the intro. Short words about myself, Director of Global Supply Chain and Site Qualification. I'm with Orchard for about 3 years by now. 2 years before that, I was with Bluebird here based in Switzerland as well. Overall, it's 25 years in supply chain, logistics, procurement, and so on in various industries, as you can see, cell and gene, pharma, aerospace, real estate, and so on. And the responsibilities that I have within Orchard Therapeutics are among the global site qualification for clinical and for commercial setting, and then also for logistics and distribution from the start of enrollment to cell collection all the way to drug product delivery, and then the complete end-to-end order management and the COI, COC creation as well. A bit about Orchard. We're a global leader in hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy. We're focused on rare plus ultra rare conditions and diseases. Also, the current one that we are commercial with is for metachromatic leukodystrophy with a product called LibMeldy in EMEA and LenMeldy in the US. And obviously, we're dedicated to transform the lives of patients with rare diseases. Our global headquarters is in Boston, and our US headquarters in London, pardon, and our US headquarters is in Boston. With that, I'll hand it over to the next presenter. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Marcel. So just a real quick introduction to Cryoport Systems for those not familiar. Cryoport Systems is a global leader in temperature-controlled supply chain and storage solutions for the biopharma and cell and gene therapy industry. Currently, we're supporting more than 690 clinical trials and 17 commercial cell and gene therapy products. Our comprehensive services span cryopreservation, biostorage, biologistics, kit production, drug packaging, secondary drug labeling, and custom packaging solutions for shipping cell and gene therapy materials and life-saving biopharma therapies globally. Our integrated approach not only prioritizes quality, but also aims to minimize risk and costs associated with the cell therapy supply chain. This comprehensive integration extends across our entire global network, ensuring that each step of the process is meticulously managed and monitored. By ensuring the availability of high-quality, manufacturer-ready cryopreserved leukopaks, we're enabling proactive planning and scaling of cell therapy production processes, supporting the timely and cost-effective development of advanced cell therapies. So with that, I'm looking forward to a great discussion. I'll pass it back to Charlotte.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Great to meet you all, and yeah, great to have your introductions. So we'll get started on the questions now. So the first question I've got here, from your perspective, what's the most difficult aspect of managing the apheresis network and cell therapy supply chains? Marcel, let's come to you first.
Sure. Especially within Orchard, everything, we're talking ultra rare disease, so we're talking a low paid number of patients. And so I'd say it's all still manually done. So, from order placement through managing all the stakeholders and so on. So it's just crucial that the alignment of all stakeholders that are involved is quite the challenge. And it just needs to work like clockwork or like an engine. All the cogs need to work together. As a second one, I would say it's flexibility, because we're talking human people, we're talking patients here. So there can always be a shift and or a cancellation of a treatment. And we all need to be flexible around that with not only logistics, but also with manufacturing and us as the facilitator in between. And first, not last, but it's just as important that everybody's prepped, trained, and knows exactly what she or he is doing.
Absolutely. Amy, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, one of the most difficult aspects is that nothing ever stays the same. Everything is always changing and is always in flux. So it's not like just a one and done to onboard apheresis networks and train apheresis networks or say your supply chain is always good. And that's partially, I think because, well, internally, in-house, things change. Things happen out in your networks as well. So apheresis centers geographically dispersed across, the globe sometimes, and they also have their own processes and procedures that might change, that might impact your management of the network. And then obviously things like with supply chain, there's always weather-related issues that change up a great plan, as well as, things like, global and political things that are happening can sometimes change that as well.
Absolutely. Jenny? Oh, you're on mute, Jenny.
Thank you. I'm going to expand a little bit on Amy and Marcel's comments. And, to Marcel's point, everything has to work like a machine. Everything has to be moving in tandem. And as a result, we have to make sure that those staff members at each of those apheresis centers are well trained and ready to move at the drop of a hat and be able to respond to all the contingency events that Amy's talking about. Of course, in the context of that, we also know within our healthcare industry, individuals are moving around both internally within the hospital as well as leaving and going to other hospital-based systems. So continuing to keep people trained, aware, and all the contact information available, all the things updated to make sure that the training and the application of that training goes well, I think is often one of the more difficult portions of the supply chain network.
Definitely. Brilliant. So next question I've got here, what are some underappreciated challenges associated with building apheresis networks and managing cell therapy supply chains? Those things that sort of complicate the in-house operations. Amy, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, so I'm going to add an extra word in there. I would say underappreciated and underestimated, I think. And those things really revolve around the time and the resources and the commitment that you really need to put in to be able to adequately manage those types of activities. I think, ultimately, we're all aware it's the sponsor, it's the manufacturer who's responsible to make sure that everything goes per plan, everything is per regulations, everything is per spec across the entire supply chain. And whether those things are happening in-house or happening out or whether they're outsourced is ultimately, their responsibility. And that can take a lot of time in order to manage, and it takes a lot of internal resources, both human and financial. And then obviously it's an ongoing commitment, as mentioned, as we were just talking about, things need to go like clockwork, and they need to be timely, and that can be very difficult to manage.
Brilliant. Jenny?
In addition to what we were just talking about with Amy, part of one of those underestimated challenges are everything's fine until it's not. And in those moments, you have usually minutes to respond and figure out what your plan is and have that plan ready to be executed. And that can be anywhere from drug recalls, right? It can be supply shortages, it could be weather events, it could be anything. And often, I think because of the fact that often everything is fine until it's not, it's a little bit underestimated or underappreciated how much effort and time you may need to allocate to those particular circumstances when they come up. Just like when you're designing a process, you often have to design to the 90%, but the 10% is often where you're going to end up spending time and energy that you may not have anticipated previously.
Marcel, would you agree with those points?
Absolutely, and I can just underline what has been said, especially not only on the underappreciated one, that's the one I'll get to at the later moment, but the underestimated one, like Amy just said before. So we're quite quick as it relates to, let's say, site qualification as an organization on our side. But what's mostly underestimated is, the contractual part, the legal part, the understanding also of the site, the hospitals and everyone, just to make sure that, that the MSA, the supply agreement, and also the quality agreement are up and running before we even get, started with the treatment. Like I said, Orchard is in an ultra rare disease field where we're in. So in terms of it's also capacity that's it's underappreciated. So we're 5 people in the site qualification team. But we're doing this as a part-time, not as our main job. It's kind of like a side business. And we're 2 people in logistics and distribution. So capacity is something that is underrated, underappreciated, I feel at moments. And then also timing. Like I just said before, not only on the contractual part, but it's like as of the moment, like we got FDA approval earlier this year, and we want to have the sites up and running right there and then, for them to be able. And this is usually when people just expect to drop everything and for you to focus only on one thing well as your daily business continues. And then also next to underappreciated, underestimated, just adding to what Jenny said, unforeseen, living in Europe, strikes is one of the bigger topics. And this is just something we really have to consider, and having a good logistics partner on the side really helps navigating around those issues.
Yeah, covered a lot of issues, underappreciated, underestimated, and
unforeseen.
Unforeseen. Thanks, Marcel. Okay, brilliant. Does scale up for larger clinical trials and commercialization change the considerations for keeping supply chains outsourced versus bringing them in-house. Jenny?
Of course it does. All of those little instances that Marcel just talked about happen more frequently, right? Things are going to change, things are going to look different. And although you might look at that cost and say, hey, maybe I can do it differently in-house, usually the considerations are you can do that until something happens. Marcel's example of the strikes in Europe is always one. I feel like there's one a week at this point. And being prepared for that unknown is incredibly important. But we also know that having the ability to be agile associated with those events, shortages, whatever those might be, as well as having a good quality base is going to be incredibly important as you move forward. And sometimes you see that as you partner with others in order to scale those operations.
Definitely. Marcel?
Sure. Yeah. So first and foremost, it's. I think that the biggest topic you want to make sure you can adhere to or control is quality of service, quality of product flow, quality of documentation in general. So whether or not you do it in-house or external, I think quality stands as the major label above all. And then there's just a tipping point, where it makes sense for in-house versus outsourcing, and that's just relating to workload and cost. Very simple.
Yeah, definitely. Amy?
Yeah, I think yes to everything, and I think I would also add that it's probably a big mistake to not be thinking about scalability super early on, and thinking about what is it that you want to have as your core capabilities. Do you really, what is it? Where do you want to focus your priorities on as a company? And I think that thinking about when things go well and you go from where you are today to where you want to be 3-5 years from now, do you want to have those teams like onboarding and training and qualification? Is that something that you're going to build into your program, into your business model as a core capability? Or does it really make sense to focus on what it is that you do best, what it is that your priority is, and look to potentially outsource some of those activities? And so I think when it comes to scalability, again, definitely be looking at those considerations upfront as you're developing out what your program looks like.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I've got a few questions now directed to each of you. So you're each going to be in the hot seat briefly. So I'm going to start with Marcel. So I want to ask you about, so over the past few years, you've obviously experienced the process of outsourcing, then insourcing, and now potentially outsourcing again. Can you share some of the sort of insights that you have from that experience?
Yeah, sure. So it's the activities or the outsourcing that we had with NMDP or BDMatch, as we called them earlier on, is site qualification was outsourced, audits were outsourced, and logistics activities were outsourced as well. We started off with clinical trials, and then also as we went live or commercial in Europe, we were also able to count on the support when we went commercial in Europe. Then it was decided that NMDP will focus on allogenic only. So we were kind of forced to insource everything involuntarily, I'd like to say. And then so we insourced site qualification and audits, and we were forced to find another logistics provider in the meantime. But we remained in contact, and so it was a departure that was not with a tear on both sides in our eyes, and so we were in good contact, and we were informed that NMDP decided to get back into autologous business, and hence we're in contact again, and we're onboarding again. And obviously we have a primary supplier for logistics activities, but it's like having worked in procurement and logistics in the last 25 years, it's one of my core messages, or one of my core intentions, to have a backup supplier, so we can switch between one and the two. So it's just really important to have a good supplier as a backup or as a primary one.
Yeah, good point. Anyone else have anything to add on that, on the process of Outsourcing, insourcing, outsourcing? No? Okay. Well, Amy, I want to ask you, because I know you've had a sort of a unique experience, having served as a program coordinator for pediatric bone marrow transplant program before transitioning to various roles in the cell therapy industry. I know a few years ago, it was definitely quite challenging to find qualified apheresis staff to assist with CGT-sponsored center sort of onboarding and training. Is that skill set still difficult to find? And if so, do you have any recommendations for trying to locate skilled apheresis professionals?
Yeah, great question. And if I have a fantastic answer, it's probably going to be a wow, amazing. I have kind of sort of an okay answer. So yeah, it's definitely still a challenge to recruit individuals with that skill set. And unfortunately, I think actually in some respects, by choosing to develop in-house teams of these incredibly valuable apheresis nurses and technicians, the industry might be contributing to some of the issues that we have on the collection capacity side, because we're pulling resources from the bedside to be able to come and fill some of these roles. So I think that's just kind of an important consideration. But I think if I have a recommendation, when it comes to this particular situation, is to really carefully think about the buy versus build of developing full in-house onboarding and training capabilities. So I think it's really important to consider things again like resources. So it is still very challenging to find those right people, and I think you're looking for folks that have apheresis experience. Apheresis itself is kind of a science. It's not, I think Marcel mentioned earlier the variability. Every patient, every donor is different. And so even though you might have an SOP, a manual that tells you exactly how to run the machine, it's a science to figure out, how exactly that particular patient or donor is going to be responding to their therapy or to their collection. And so you're looking for people that have that experience. And I think then also from a qualification, a site qualification perspective, you're looking for people who not only understand the quality and regulatory landscape, both locally and from a state, from a federal level, but you're looking for people who understand too that the product, they understand the environment in which they're out there qualifying these sites. And so I think that as our industry grows and demand for these particular roles is growing, the competition is increasing as well to find these folks. And so it can take a lot of time to find just the right people and assemble that team. So that's kind of one thing to consider. Additionally, I think scalability, again, I'll bring up that word, is key. So always remember that. I think as an organization, really consider your organization's support for adding those additional headcount for these roles when you need them. Because again, when you need them, and there can be a significant lead time to recruit and train and onboard folks to be able to perform these services in-house. And then finally, I think another consideration is thinking about, again, your business model. Is this something that is critical for you to have in-house? Is there something that isn't currently being done by other organizations that you want to bring on and do yourself? Or is this something that you can focus on your primary responsibilities, your primary targets, which are obviously bringing your therapy to market and potentially release some of these other services as an outsourced. But I think, again, should you choose to build in-house and you go looking for these particular skill sets, I think, to consider posting for positions with professional organizations like ASFA, the usual social media platforms like LinkedIn or Indeed, and also consider looking into a recruitment agency that's familiar with these types of skill sets. I will, though, just add, I think it's super important that if you do choose to go any of these routes, that you do actively manage, your search, actively manage your posts, and then, provide feedback to applicants. Again, it's a competitive market, and so, if you're up against some other organizations that are looking for the same folks that you're looking for. But I think then, should you choose to buy or outsource these types of activities, maybe it's even just a bridge as you make a decision whether or not you want to bring these skills in-house, or maybe it's to supplement or enhance your current team. I think that there's some really great options out there. You can identify a third-party organization that has a strong cell and gene therapy experience. They've been out there, they understand what's happening. And think about outsourcing things, like site qualification, like site management, initial and ongoing training is something too that's there's lots of great options for as well. And then finally, I would just say too, I think it's important to keep in mind, consider, I'll use another term that we've thrown around for years in cell therapy, your secret sauce. Really, what is it that you need to keep in-house? What is it that you can outsource potentially, and really leverage existing groups that are out there. So and always keep in mind too, that remember that the centers that you're onboarding, that you're qualifying, more than likely are already accredited by globally recognized organizations like AABB or FACT-JC. And so there's a lot of things, that they're already familiar with. And think about that when it comes to training too. There's a lot of things that for an apheresis collection are pretty standard. But just remember that sometimes these centers really just need to be trained to those special things that have to do with your particular protocol.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's really helpful. And Jenny and Marcel, would you agree that it's a challenge finding skilled staff in this industry? And do you have any tips at all to add to Amy's?
I'll maybe add in that, I think Amy definitely highlighted the fact that sometimes when you have skilled staff that are coming into your program, you might be losing them elsewhere, right? There's a lot of movement back and forth. There's a little bit of a finite supply right now in terms of those experts. So being really careful about your hiring decisions as well as where you're sourcing from becomes an important aspect of making sure that you're maintaining not only your own team, but other teams that are partners with you.
Yeah, I can only second what has been said before. I just went through a recruitment myself. Luckily, the contract is being signed this week, so successful on my side. But I like the secret sauce, so I'll keep that in mind, because it's really something that it is secret and should stay secret, but apart from yourself, and that what makes the engine run, I'd like to say.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, great. Question for you, Jenny. So NMDP Biotherapies and its parent company, NMDP, obviously you're responsible for shipping tens of thousands of cell and blood shipments every year. So your model relies heavily on outsourced solutions, but you also have an internal courier program. So I'm wondering, what are the benefits and the risks from your point of view of using outsourced vendors versus an internal solution? Are there circumstances where one is clearly better than the other? And if so, why?
Well, first and foremost, I'll say that both have a place and both need to be at the table in order to move forward. If you use the courier example as an example, we do have both situations where we work with outside vendors in order to deliver the cellular therapy material, as well as a volunteer courier program that we have internal. And both have very different aspects of how we apply them on a day-to-day basis. We can't send our volunteers to all of the different locations throughout the world for various reasons. Visa application necessity, maybe safety, as well as sometimes timing, right? It's hard to get our US-based volunteer couriers to Europe on the drop of a dime. However, we have partners that are based in Europe that are able to turn around couriers very quickly. So in those circumstances, we're really able to essentially create an algorithm to say, where do we use which option first, and where do we pivot to additional options? And that often is going to be site specific as well as product specific, just given some of the complexities and some of the quality that we want to ensure throughout the way. So, if you start to expand that to other scenarios where you're deciding, do you use a vendor or do you keep things in-house? I think a lot of that is going to be case by case. specifically where you can leverage other expertise and do that in a way that's going to highlight essentially your own secret sauce that you have within your company. That's where you're going to find benefit to potentially add in a vendor. However, if your secret sauce is something, then that's where you might want to keep it more internal. But, you know, being in the industry that we all are in, each of us likely have our own kind of specialty within that particular area. And there is benefit to not having to completely rebuild something and allow that whatever is built to be re-engineered and improved upon instead of building from scratch. Because of course, as you get into things, you're going to learn things that you didn't anticipate early on, which either cost additional money or extend timelines that we know our patients may or may not have at the end of the day. So, you know, I really think there's an opportunity for both. It's really case by case. And at the NMDP, we do the same, where we leverage the expertise of some of our external vendors, such as some of the physicians and the apheresis staff that we use at different apheresis sites. But then there's opportunities where we know that we're able to do, you know, next level top of class service, that we're able to add additional value on top of some of those vendors that we work with externally. And in those circumstances, that's really where our expertise and our quality lie is within those particular solutions that we keep in-house.
Brilliant. And Marcel and Amy, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or examples on that of solutions where there's times when there's definitely one option is better than the other, or your general approach to that. No comments. That's okay. I can see we're getting some great questions coming in from the audience. Do keep those coming. Anything that we don't get to today, we'll reply by email, so no question will go unanswered. So do keep questions coming. And yeah. Okay, next one I've got here. So the success of all cell and gene therapies is highly dependent on the quality of raw materials and the supply chain, obviously. How are you working to ensure success in supply chain management? So, for example, sourcing quality starting materials and avoiding any possible disruptions in that area. Marcel, come to you first.
Yeah. You know, it sounds cheesy, but you know, it's like everything else in life. It's about planning. You know, if you got good planning going on, if you got a good base in, you know, in demand planning and supply planning, you know, you got a great fundament of and ensure supply. I talked about quality earlier on, so I'm not going to go into that one. But you know, there's as much planning and there's as much quality you can do, but you definitely also need reliable partners. And then there's, you know, as I said earlier on, you know, we're in a very small scale. So, you know, it's and some events are unforeseeable, like we discussed before. So you have to be ready and flexible as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Amy.
Yeah, so a couple things here. So I think, you know, one, there's a lot of great work going on in the industry right now towards standardization of different aspects of the supply chain. And I think that, you know, that is helpful because, you know, obviously we can't control everything with a human variable that starts up front, but what are those things that we can really work, you know, standards around? And I think that's important to not only help to mitigate risks, but also, you know, it really helps to increase efficiencies as well, to develop standards. And so things like labeling, like, you know, standardized collection protocols, standardized cryopreservation protocols, things like that can really, you know, help to, you know, mitigate some of those challenges. But then also I think, you know, as an industry, we all tend to find those challenges, you know, pretty much in common. And I think there's a lot of work going on to say to those, you know, look at a challenge and say, okay, how can we fix this? And I think in one of the ways that, you know, we're addressing it at Cryoport is through cryopreservation. So, you know, really mitigating and addressing the challenges of getting fresh material into the, I You probably just saw a cattail go across, and my apologies for that.
No problem. We love an unscheduled cat.
I've been doing my best to keep her at bay. I think that with IntegraCell, which is our cryopreservation service platform, one of the things that we're doing is providing cryopreservation between the collection and manufacturing to really allow manufacturers the time to have their facilities ready to receive the product when they're ready. Product arrives, manufacturer ready, and on it goes. And so I think identifying some of those challenges within the supply chain, where potentially maybe we think of things a little bit differently, maybe we consider other avenues to mitigate some of the risks that we're all running up against, is just really important.
Yeah, Jenny.
I think if we think about what was maybe unplannable, 10 years ago, that looks a lot different now. So I think Marcel and Amy really highlighted, we're working with humans, so there are some things that you can't necessarily prepare for and be ready for. However, as we continue to learn and leverage that expertise across the industry, we can begin to start to plan for some of those different areas and ensure that we're doing whatever the solution for that scenario consistently. The first time you see something, okay, you have to figure out what and how we're going to respond to that particular instance. But into the future, the hope is that we can provide more of that, at the time, expertise to say, okay, we've actually seen this before, and this is how we're going to handle it, which allows us to increase the quality and increase the consistency associated with those raw materials and the supply chain that we're supporting with that. So really it's leveraging that expertise and creating some of those consistent manuals, operating procedures, all of those types of things, and expanding what we have those pointed at, so that they're not just pointed at the happy path, but they're also pointed at all of the other scenarios that we know inherently will come up, and to the point where the happy path is the minimal portion of what we're managing. Rather, it's what are we going to do when we hook this particular patient up to this apheresis machine and this happens? Having the plan associated with that well executed, so that we can ensure that it'll hold up to that quality and just volume rigor that we're going to have as this particular field continues to grow.
Yeah, great, thank you. And as the focus of the cell therapy market continues to shift towards innovations of allogeneic cell therapies, how will the autologous supply chain likely be affected in the future? And how will that change? Will that maybe change the approach towards that in-house or outsourcing divide? Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think in some ways a lot of the same resources are needed, whether it's autologous, allogeneic, in-house, outsourcing. But one of the things that I think is important is that autologous programs are quite often run in-house in the clinical academic setting. And I think that as we start to see, more of the allogeneic therapies, that's going to become a little bit of a challenge for those autologous programs, maybe to give up space for some allogeneic program opportunities as well. But I think, overall, it's the same resources. I think that, allogeneic donors, of course, don't necessarily require that same level of oversight necessarily when it comes to the collection activities. So hopefully those, are more performed out in the community type settings and things like that. And we'll be developing, ways to be able to reach more patients, or more donors, I should say, and more patients out into the community settings when it comes to the apheresis of their initial starting materials as well. But I think the considerations remain the same for when way in the beginning of our talk, we talked about available resources and finding those skilled apheresis nurses and skilled technicians to assist. And so again, I think keeping in mind that, the more that the more the need for apheresis grows, the more the need for additional skill sets and professionals in the field it's going to grow.
Thank you, Jenny.
I want to echo what Amy is talking about, but maybe add in a few additional pieces. So, in the allogeneic space, I think often what we see is that we're able to potentially change who or where or how the cells are transported around the globe. And, to the earlier points that a lot of the time the autologous setting is more centralized, more in-house. We hope that we can continue to bring those consistent new opportunities, such as how do we transport cells, how do we keep the temperature accurate, all of those types of things to the autologous setting and help learn. But there's also the capacity concern that will obviously end up kind of trading off between the allogeneic and the autologous setting that will, of course, impact both settings and have an influence in the future of both. Because, of course, if we don't have the capacity, it's hard to continue to grow either of those spaces.
Absolutely. Okay, so a question here going into abilities on sort of standards and accreditation. What's the difference between the FACT requirements and what a manufacturer would need to qualify? If the site is FACT accredited for immunoeffector cells, what else would I need to check on site? Or what other questions should I be asking? Who'd like to take that one?
I'll be happy to start, and then obviously if anyone else has some thoughts. I think that's a really great question, and I think that's something too that it's definitely worth the time to review the standards that are available for immune effector cells, because obviously they do span from the collection to the infusion of the cells, and so it's really important, I think, to review those, bounce them up against what requirements you might have internally, because I think more often than not you're going to check a lot of the boxes by reviewing those standards for that FACT, JC, and that AABB put out there for these organizations. And so they're very well maybe a handful of things that are a little bit different for a particular protocol, but definitely review them, because I think it's a real win to identify those sites that have been FACT, JC, or AABB accredited, because that someone's been there, someone has audited or assessed them against the standards, and you can be assured that the center meets or exceeds at least those standards that are listed in their requirements.
And add there, anyone? Was Amy covered it?
No, the only other thing, so thanks for the details, Amy. The only other thing is we're getting a lot of pushback. We're asking for accreditation, FACT, JC, and so on when we qualify a site, and it's like we still go by and audit the sites, according to our own assessment and audit standards and so on. And we do get pushback. It's like, why do you audit us as well when we are already FACT and JC accredited? So this is definitely something that we're weighing in, now and also in the future on saying, how can we leverage that and reduce the pain, because it is a pain, because, each one of us companies are going out there, like, we want to audit you, we want to re-audit you after a certain period of time. So we hear, we listen, and we adapt. That's all I can say.
Yeah, clear. Well, nods of agreement there. Okay, great. Next question I've got here. How do you deal with QA release in the short time frame from manufacture to administration? Do you have any learnings to share? And how are materials, methods, and personnel managed? Do you do mock runs before you go live? A few questions in one there.
I can jump in on this one. I'll maybe practice is the way to manage with that short time frame. So, although it seems like a document that we've made intuitive to make sure that everything is flowing as you would anticipate, many of our clinical staff are also going to look at it with a different set of eyes at those particular clinical sites. And as a result, doing those mock runs, which is mentioned in the question itself, is incredibly important. But that mock run is not necessarily just to see if your paperwork works. It's also to make sure that those staff members that are attempting to administer the process that you're asking to do are able to do it in a time frame that's going to be effective. You'd be surprised. One particular apheresis site is able to do it really quickly. Another one might need to make changes in order to be able to do the same process. And that's not because one is a higher quality than the other. It's just based on inherent challenges within their particular system that they need to work around. And you might find that for another protocol, the same sites are exactly flip-flopped in terms of how quickly they're able to get through things. So those practice runs or those mock runs and just the overall conversation and consistency in terms of doing those are incredibly important. You know, earlier in this presentation, I talked a little bit about the staff turnover that we see within those clinical sites. So you may think that those mock runs just need to happen before you do your first collection within a particular site. But what we find is often there's going to be some repetition that's going to be necessary based on who's actually at those sites at a given time. So finding a way to do that over time is incredibly important, especially if you're not seeing apheresis collections at those particular sites in between.
If I may add to that one, so great, Jenny. You know, it's for us working internationally and globally. It's just as crucial to have the mock runs or mock shipments, as we call them, to also pass customs. And we just have a recent example is, you know, in Saudi Arabia, you know, just to get the mock cells across the border and also drug product across the border into and out of Saudi Arabia and so on. Requires, you know, the signature of the Ministry of Health, and not just someone at the Ministry of Health, but the top. And you know that's just just proves why a mock shipment is absolutely crucial. So you understand the complexity when you actually want to go live.
Yeah, and if I could just jump on that as well, I think that all of this really speaks to the time and commitment that it takes to manage the network, to manage the supply chain and what's happening, you know, out there. Because I think, to Jenny's point, you know, every site's going to be different. You can create a mock run plan, and you can try to pass this off to every site, but there's going to be something that's going to come up that's going to be a little bit different. And I think that it's just really important to stay on top of those. And I think Marcel mentioned it earlier as well. You know, things change all of the time, and what might have worked during your mock run, you know, 6 months ago, might not be the case anymore. And so I think that's just really important for continuously monitoring the system to make sure that everything's going to go as planned.
Yeah, great points there, everyone. How could outsourcing potentially impact overall developer-to-developer variability in requirements for collection or logistics? If you'd like to jump in on that.
Not quite sure if I understand the question correctly.
I mean, I can jump in and maybe try to answer the question a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, as we see different clients using different methodologies in terms of collection and logistics, each of those apheresis sites are obviously engaging with all of those different clients. So wherever possible, having a standard protocol is beneficial just to the humans that are attempting to do all the things. You know, Marcel used the example of the Ministry of Health has to sign off on a letter. If the letter looks the same for all the different developers, which we attempt to do here at NMDP Biotherapies, it helps because they know where to sign, they know what they're looking for, they know what's going to be included, they know what to look for. So in those circumstances, you absolutely allow for some of those things to happen more seamlessly. And, you know, where possible, standardizing allows for that to happen. Of course, there's going to be nuances and variables that you can't standardize. However, where possible, making it as easy to follow and the same, if possible, time over time allows us to see speed and also quality improvements from some of those outsourced vendors, right, at the end of the day. But of course, that's when we can standardize. And again, we standardize what we can. So sometimes even as simply as the paperwork all looks the same, the headers are all the same, the letter looks the same, can make big differences in that speed and accuracy.
Thank you. And a question here about shipping systems. What is your priority in selecting a shipping system? Is it the size of the shipper, a data logger, absorbent material? Yeah, what's your priority when you're selecting a shipping system? Who wants to jump in there?
So I'll start. You know, I think all of the above. right? So it's about, what does your product require? Where is it going? How far does it need to travel? What are the temperature requirements for your product? And how do you want to keep track of it? Obviously, you want to know from start to finish where your product is in the supply chain and during its travel. You want to be able to know whether there's been any temperature variabilities within the product during its travel that could impact its ability to move forward onto manufacturers. So I think, again, it's more product specific, and it's more knowing about what does that shipment lane look like, where you're expecting your product to go from point A to point B, and being able to monitor that across the board, which is something, obviously Cryoport does and has done for a really long time. And so, I think that just having that visibility into realizing, any temperature variabilities that your product may have experienced, any delays along the way, as well as having someone, having a human available to be monitoring and to be making those course adjustments during the journey to make sure that your product gets there as safely as possible.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. How does pursuing broader geographical distribution of your therapy impact how you might leverage outsourcing? Jenny, do you want to start on that one?
I can, absolutely. I think Marcel touched a little bit on anytime you're starting to cross borders, the complexity associated with the solution increases exponentially. And you then don't need to only worry about those apheresis staff doing things the same way every time. But now you need to worry about customs and borders and Ministry of Health or the FDA or all of these different regulations associated with those different countries. So of course, finding a partner that is able to help with that geographical distribution and has experience in attempting to get in and out of particular borders is going to be advantageous. Even to Canada, you would think Canada, which is our partner to the north, would be really easy to get these types of products in and out of. But we know through experience, at least at the NMDP, that that's not always the case. And there's certain things that we can do to make it really easy. However, that's not something that just happens by happenstance, that happens through experience.
Yeah, I can only second that. And having worked in procurement, I'm sorry that I'm reiterating this one, but it's important to understand that in business like this, time and quality are more important than money. Don't ever go for the cheapest supplier, because it's going to bite you at the very end. And it's you want to have best in class. You want to have experienced people, like Jenny just said. You want to have people that already walk the walk and have been there, because it's just too precious to start gambling just because to save to save a few dollars.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, let's squeeze another one in. As the number of patients being treated by cell therapies grows, if you look out into the future, so gaze into your crystal balls, do you foresee outsourcing increasing over time? Who wants to start? Marcel, you look like you have something to say.
I shouldn't have unmuted then. No, I think it can go both ways, but by tendency, it usually is the larger you get, the more you have also capacity to insource. Whereas when you're really small, you don't have the capacity in-house yet, and you want to outsource. But you might as well just do it the other way around, where you go like, okay, we've gone too big, I can't handle it anymore, I want to outsource. So I think it depends on the needs of the company and what your strategy is.
Yeah, I would second that, because again, I think it's a matter of what does your business model look like? Are there things that you don't want to focus on? You don't want to spend time and resources on worrying about things like network management or training or aspects of the supply chain, that you feel comfortable finding those partners, creating those really strong quality agreements between yourselves to be able to essentially work as one, to be able to manage your supply chain, I think is important. So I think it's just a matter of really identifying what is going to be the priority, what is going to be the focus of your business, and then making that determination of, again, do you outsource as a bridge just until you figure that out to see if that's something that you want to bring in, or is it something that you're willing to have a third party perform for you so that you can really focus on the manufacture of your product?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about the focus, right? What do you want to spend your time and energy and capital on? Is it, the part of the process that goes well? Probably, right? Most people will say, I can handle what I anticipate. But as you continue to scale and increase the number of patients that are treated, increase the geographical distribution of those patients, all of that extra stuff, the things that you did not anticipate, that did not pop up when you had a small reach, are going to start to come up, and they're going to require time and attention from you. And if you don't have the capacity to manage that, that's where outsourcing may make sense, right? Because there may be other experts in the field that are able to manage that. And that's their everyday, right? Is managing those unexpected moments. So I think it really depends upon what your focus and what you want to be focused on as you continue to increase the number of patients that are treated by that therapy.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up for today. So thank you very much, Jenny, Marcel, and Amy. That was a very informative, very thought-provoking discussion. And I particularly enjoyed the discussion of the secret sauce, I have to say. So that's all we've got time for today. Any questions that we didn't get to, we will reply by email later on, as I said. So today's webinar will be available on demand tomorrow as well. So look out for an email from us with the link. We'd also like to invite you to take a short survey to provide us with feedback on today's webinar. The link to that can be found in the resources on the right-hand side of your screen, or it'll also be in the on-demand email. So all that's left then is to thank Jenny, Amy, and Marcel once more for a great discussion, and thank you to the audience for watching today. We do hope you'll join us again soon.